Greetings and welcome to Illinois in Focus, powered by the Center Square. I'm Dan McCaleb, Chief Content Officer at Franklin News Foundation, publisher of the Center Square Newswire service. This week in Illinois in Focus, we'll discuss Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson's appearance before a congressional committee investigating sanctuary cities, reaction to the Illinois House floor to President Donald Trump's address to a joint session of Congress, and a new study saying Illinois has the highest tax rates in the country. All that and more when we return.
Teacher Lauren Johnson returned all the graded essays but one. He believed that one student was capable of more.
I don't believe taking the middle of the road is your philosophy. This time, write something you really believe.
The student wrote a new one about excellence. Instead of just grading an essay, Mr. Johnson changed a life. I am that student. I became a writer, and I wrote this to thank him.
Thank a teacher and pass it on from passiton.com.
Welcome back to Illinois in Focus. Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson joined the Democratic mayors of 3 other sanctuary cities in testifying before Congress this week. Joining me to discuss this is Illinois Associate Editor Greg Bishop. Greg, tell us more about this hearing.
So this hearing definitely highly anticipated with several mayors, not just Chicago's mayor testifying in front of a U.S. House Oversight Committee controlled by Republicans. And the focus was on sanctuary state and city policies. Now, we have to explain what that is. Illinois, in particular, has policies on the books, laws on the books that prevent and prohibit local law enforcement and state police from cooperating with federal immigration authorities. Only when there is a civil detainer order. They will cooperate with criminal detainer orders, but not when it's civil. But that still raised a lot of concern with people who are wanting to ensure that we have illegal aliens in the United States being handled properly and deported. But Illinois had these laws on the books for several years. In 2017, the Trust Act, which prohibits local law enforcement from cooperating with federal immigration authorities in most cases, that was actually signed by Republican Governor Bruce Rauner back then. Then in 2021, Governor J.B. Pritzker signed a Way Forward Act. And that essentially went a step further and said that, for instance, local law enforcement can't even ask about the immigration status of somebody that they pull over in a traffic violation, or somebody they encounter, might be a suspect, or even somebody they arrest. They can't ask the immigration status of that individual. They also can't broadcast out that status to ICE, the Immigration Customs Enforcement. But A Way Forward also went further and prohibited any more usage of local county jail space for ICE detentions. We had this happen, especially in like Kankakee County. The sheriff there had several beds assigned specifically for whether ICE needed an extra bed to house somebody while they processed a detention order. But that ceased with the Way Forward Act. So Johnson's there as a mayor of Chicago to discuss the state laws, but also Chicago's welcoming city ordinance, which Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson testified was focused on making sure that migrants who are in the country and living in Chicago actually have a cooperative nature when it comes to working with law enforcement. So, for instance, if a non-citizen is in the United States and is a victim of crime in Chicago, the proponents of the Welcoming City Ordinance say the measure allows for these migrants who may be victims of crime to actually report that they're victims of crime. So that really is kind of, what some of the talking points that Johnson provided in front of this committee. But Dan, you could clearly see the partisan divide in the committee. Democrats were working to bolster those arguments that supporters of migrant sanctuary policies have. The Republicans came pretty heavy in asking direct questions about, should a violent criminal be released from jail if they're a non-citizen? How much money has been spent on non-citizens in your city? These are questions that some Republicans were looking for yes or no answers to, but they didn't quite get those, and even led to some interesting TV moments with Representative Nancy Mace questioning Brandon Johnson in particular and not getting a yes or no answer, and proclaiming that that's why Johnson has such a low approval rating. And even Byron Donalds from Florida asking Johnson how much taxpayers have spent on non-citizen migrants. And when Johnson couldn't give an exact dollar number, Donald said that's why he's not managing his city well if he doesn't know what that number is. So definitely a lot of fireworks in that House committee. But I think an important conversation that you're likely going to hear a lot more about, Dan, because while all that was happening in the halls of Congress, in federal court, Illinois still faces a lawsuit from the Department of Justice over its sanctuary policies. And we had some movement on that this week as well, Dan. That case was filed by the Department of Justice when Pam Bondi became the Attorney General. It was one of her first actions is to file that lawsuit against the state of Illinois and Governor J.B. Pritzker, Cook County and Cook County Board President Tony Preckwinkle, Cook County Sheriff Tom Dart, and Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson, all defendants in this case. But on Tuesday, the state, county, and city, they all filed motions to dismiss the case in federal court. So we've got early April when the DOJ is set to respond to that. So that case is still pending. And all of that was going on while you had Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson and the mayors of Denver, New York City, and elsewhere testifying in front of Congress about migrant sanctuary policies.
Yeah, Mayor Johnson, near the beginning of the hearing, he claimed that Chicago is safer because of its welcoming city policies. Yet, nearly every city council meeting, residents of Chicago show up during the public comment section and rail against the city's welcoming city ordinance and its sanctuary city policies. They don't think it's safer because of their sanctuary policies.
Well, yes, and you see this every week. There's a Chicago City Council meeting. The residents do stand up, and it's an interesting mix of individuals upset about the sanctuary city policies. And even, reflect back to, was it last year or the year before, Dan, where some Chicago aldermen wanted to try to get a non-binding resolution on a Chicago ballot to have voters weigh in whether or not the city should be a sanctuary city. Well, the majority of the aldermen blocked that measure from even being put on the ballot, and it was non-binding. It wouldn't have changed anything. It just would have been a public poll of sorts to get the sentiment of the city of Chicago. But when you have the residents standing up and discussing the potential crime there could be with non-citizens moving to Chicago, but it seems that there's also just a major frustration, especially with the minority community in Chicago, of the amount of money that's been spent on non-citizen migrants. We're talking not just for housing, food, and school and lawyer services. We're talking the non-citizen healthcare taxpayer subsidies that go out. And it's all combined, just billions of dollars that's been spent. And also the use of certain facilities for migrant shelters. A lot of people have complained that their children's local community center, for instance, was transformed into a migrant shelter, taking away that space for their kids to have safe, enjoyable times. So there's a whole collection of different complaints that some residents of Chicago have been pretty persistent on making sure that Chicago city leaders know their thoughts.
Yeah. On the Department of Justice lawsuit against Chicago, you mentioned the state, the county, and the city filed their response this week asking for the lawsuit to be dismissed. When can we expect any action on that? I don't think there's any hearings scheduled. Court cases can drag out forever.
They really can, Dan, and what I've seen thus far is just a brief schedule. So it's just the schedule for the various litigants in this case to file their briefs. Once those briefs are filed, the first motion has been a motion to dismiss by the defendants. So the judge is going to have to take that into consideration. So as I said, in early April, the Department of Justice is expected to file their response. So the judge will weigh all of that and make a determination on that motion to dismiss, which could be months away. And then if the case is not dismissed, then it may go to some kind of bench trial, which we have yet to even get that schedule. But I imagine that if it is dismissed by the district judge, that could very well be taken all the way up to the appeals court, and if not further. So I talked with State Senator Chapin Rose about this week. He's a Republican from Mahomet, and he essentially laid out that this is a delay tactic. He says that Governor Pritzker, Brandon Johnson, Attorney General Kwame Raoul are dug into their positions, and this effort to try to dismiss the case is really a delay tactic. He says that's just putting people in harm's way, and he told the Center Square that the governor and other elected officials that are defendants in this, they need to either comply and assist federal immigration authorities or get out of the way. And he said, if they don't do anything, then please just let sheriffs notify ICE if they have somebody that's in their custody who's not here legally. These are obviously some contentious points that the state of Illinois has been grappling with when it comes to federal immigration authorities. But one of the arguments that the state is making in court for a motion to dismiss is they say that the state has no obligation to cooperate with federal immigration authorities. In particular, they say that the state law means that the state is not required to give any state or local resources to federal officials to enforce federal immigration. So how that plays out in court, we're going to be watching this case very closely.
President Donald Trump delivered his joint address to a joint session of Congress on Tuesday night. Lawmakers had plenty to say about it the next day on the House floor. You covered that. What happened there?
Yeah, and it's always one of those things where we go into the day planning our news that we're looking that's going to be happening, and wasn't anticipating the level of a debate that we saw on the House floor here in Illinois and at the state capitol on Wednesday morning whenever they came in. And we have these moments where there can be a flurry of debate, not about a particular bill, but just about the news of the day. And you had several Democrats stand up blasting President Donald Trump for his speech, saying it was divisive. There was a lot of talk about the tariffs that the president put into effect this week, even though, now here we are a few days after the fact, and there's questions about, are those tariffs going to be relaxed? Are we going to see the reciprocal tariffs come up? But obviously a lot of concern raised by Democrats about that, especially them saying that it's going to be a tax increase on businesses and on consumers and families. One state representative, Katie Stewart, she said that the rattling of the stock market post-tariff talk really has impacted families' ability to save for retirement, and pushed back on the idea that this was all meant to try to spur more fair trade with other countries. But then you had Republican State Representative Blaine Wilhauer get up, and he seemed to highlight what he saw as hypocrisy from Democrats here in Illinois, saying that Democrats are talking about the impacts of tariffs and how it could increase taxes on Illinois families. But Wilhauer said it's been decades of Democrat rule in Illinois where you can't even build anything in Illinois anymore. He says that the taxes are too high because of Democrat policies. He says the regulations are too high because of Democrat policies. So it was an interesting back and forth debate amongst some of the legislators in the Illinois House. But it wasn't just about the economics, Dan. There was also a back and forth amongst legislators about gender ideology, because President Trump did make that part of his speech on Tuesday night, where he had a volleyball player who was severely injured when they're playing a women's volleyball game, and apparently a man was part of the opposing team and spiked a ball into the face of this player, causing significant damage. And he highlighted her as a guest of the members of Congress. But that led to State Representative Kelly Cassidy to, get on the House floor and passionately push back, saying, stop picking on our kids. They're driving people to self-harm by, focusing on this, and just let the kids do what they want type thing. But then you had State Representative Bill Howder get up, and he's a medical doctor, and he said that it's not the focus of, pushing back against gender ideology that's causing children to maybe go towards self-harm. He says that studies are showing it's children or individuals who get gender surgery or some other type of medical procedure done, that it actually increases the suicidal ideation. So interesting debate. And obviously, Illinois is a pretty political state. Democrats are in the majority. Republicans are in the minority. So you can clearly see that storyline we've been talking about for weeks now, in anticipation of Trump taking office, which now he's been in for over a month and a half or so. And the clear difference and here's a word for you, the consternation that there is between Illinois and the federal government. We're going to continue to hear these types of debates pop off in the Illinois House and even the Illinois Senate as we get through this legislative session this spring.
Oh, there's no doubt about that, Greg, because all indications are we're more than a month, about 6 weeks, I guess, into Trump's administration, and he is showing no signs of slowing down anytime soon. You referenced that volleyball player who was a guest of the president's at his address to Congress. If you haven't seen that video, it's a little disturbing. You can understand why there are concerns about that. Greg, let's get off of the back and forth between Republicans and Democrats over Trump, all things Trump, and let's get to a new financial report that was released this week that says Illinois has the highest state and local tax rates in the country. The analysis from Wallet Hub put Illinois at the bottom of the list, essentially.
Yeah, and for those who've been watching closely, Illinois' ranking in these types of studies, this really isn't a surprise, especially for Illinoisans here who live in the state and pay taxes and property taxes and sales taxes and gas taxes and even the estate tax, right? So yeah, Wallet Hub put this together, and they do this annually, and they just look at the states with the highest and lowest tax rates, and they include all 50 states, but also the District of Columbia. So when you include all of that, Illinois placed last in the country for taxation, coming in at number 51. So we even came in behind Washington, D.C. But that's for the overall effective state and local tax rate. Now, they also looked at a variety of other factors, including real estate taxes. Illinois landing at number 50 for that. And I think we're just behind New Jersey on the real estate taxes. And as far as income taxes, Dan, we have a flat income tax in Illinois. If you recall, a couple of years ago, 4 years ago, you had the effort to try to make the flat tax to a tax with higher rates for higher earners. Voters shot that down, but Illinois' income tax rate is still making it the 47th in the country. So we're still on the very bottom rung when it comes to that area of taxation. Plus, another factor that Wallet Hub looked at, we've got the second highest gas taxes in the country here in the state of Illinois. A lot of people point to that as being a very regressive tax because everybody has to pay it. Doesn't matter your income level. You are paying the same gas tax at the pump for those who make $20,000 a year and those who make $150,000 a year. In Illinois, we did double the gas tax back in 2019. And that included an annual increase tied to inflation each year to increase the gas tax. Dan, I don't know how often you're in other states, but I live in the Springfield area. I have family that live in Missouri. Every time I travel from Illinois to Missouri, it's at least a 20-cent difference in the face value of that gallon of gas. So clearly, Illinois, this report shows, definitely is at the bottom of the pack. And something else that they point out in this report from Wallet Hub, Republican majority states impose lower taxes than blue states with Democratic majorities. And that itself is pretty telling. So, yeah, another report kind of, in a way, confirming what a lot of taxpayers are feeling in Illinois, that we are among the highest taxed states in the country.
Yeah, Greg, if you look at AAA's gas prices map, deep red is the highest gas prices, deep blue is the lowest, and Illinois is a deep red, so it is significant.
That's pretty remarkable. Yeah.
Activists in Springfield are calling for energy reform at the State House after a longtime former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan was convicted of corruption-related charges in connection to the state's largest utility, ComEd. What are they seeking?
Yeah, and this is something, could fit into the ethics category here at the State House because, we've been seeing Republicans for years push for legislative fixes to allow for the Inspector General to have more independence, people pushing for term limits to make sure we don't have another 50-year term of a state legislator who climbs the ranks to become the longest serving State House Speaker, and a variety of other types of ethics reforms. But really, when you get down to it, what you see is what came out of the case against former House Speaker Michael Madigan, where he was convicted of 10 counts. It all involved, at least most of the charges involved utilities. So, kind of a quid pro quo type thing, right? Where, Madigan was alleged and convicted of, working to get favorable legislation for ComEd through the legislative process in exchange for benefits for himself and his associates. Well, you've got the Citizens Utility Board that's looking to get some legislation passed. One bill in particular would aim to prevent utility companies from enhancing their political power with consumer dollars. So one of the officials from the Citizens Utility Board told our reporter, Jim Talamonte, that if utilities want to spend money on politics, that's fine, but utilities can't recover it from their ratepayers anymore if this particular measure passes. They also went on to say that you shouldn't be increasing political power through the customer's wallets, and you ought to be pushing political power through your own wallet. So will this measure advance? This is, again, fit it into the ethics framework. But it's just one idea that could help kind of clean up some of the ethical concerns there are, especially with the high-profile case of a powerful politician working with large utility companies to get favorable legislation in exchange for personal gain. There's another measure that the Citizens Utility Board is supporting, and it would prevent utilities from making campaign contributions to people seeking municipal or state office. Whether or not that's able to stand any kind of First Amendment push or any kind of opposition to that effect, it has yet to be seen. But these are just a couple of bills that are floating around here at the State House this session that could bring about some kind of ethical reforms, especially when it deals with how politicians interact with utility companies.
Greg, we have just about a minute left. I want to squeeze in one last story, though. The man accused of the Highland Park Independence Day mass murder, where 7 people were killed, dozens more injured. He surprised everybody when his trial started, and he decided to plead guilty.
Yeah, so Robert Cremo III, he had pleaded not guilty, even though there was video of a police station confession. And then several weeks ago, that videotape was admitted into evidence. And I think that may have been a good reason why he decided to plead guilty. But I mean, ultimately, this story, it highlights the failings of a variety of things, including Illinois' firearm owner ID card law, which says you have to have a FOID card to buy a firearm or even to possess a firearm or ammunition. Well, Cremo was given a FOID card in 2019, despite having multiple visits by local police in Highland Park, where police came to calls of somebody that was possibly going to do some physical harm to himself or the family. They even confiscated knives. And in those instances, they sent state police a clear and present danger report. That report should have prevented Cremo from getting that FOID card where he legally purchased firearms, which were used in this attack, killing 7 people and injuring dozens of others in 2022.
Cremo will be sentenced on April 23rd, but I think it's safe for us to predict that he'll be spending the rest of his life in jail.
When you have 7 people he murdered with 3 murder charges against him for each one of those 7 victims, and then dozens of other attempted murder charges, yeah, I think it's safe to say he's going to spend the rest of his life behind bars.
Greg, thank you for joining us today. Listeners can keep up with all of the stories we talked about and more at thecentersquare.com.